Welcome to Minutes by Board Cycle, where in each episode we pack the insights from one of Australia's boardroom leaders into just a few minutes. Today's podcast guest is Penny Winn, Director of Ampol, CSR, Super Retail Group, and the ANU Foundation. Penny gives our host, Richard Conway, her top tips on how executives and directors should approach business performance reporting.
Hello and welcome to the Minutes podcast. I'm your host, Richard Conway, and today I'm very happy to be joined by Penny Winn. Penny is currently a director of the ANU Foundation, Ampol, CSR, and Super Retail Group. Prior to her non-executive career, Penny was a senior executive in a number of retail organisations, including Asda, Myer, and Woolworths. Welcome, Penny.
Thank you, Richard.
So, Penny, today the topic I wanted to discuss with you is business performance reporting, and I wanted to discuss that because it's very clearly and obviously critical for a board to receive clear information about how its business is reporting. But really, outside of financial reporting, there aren't a whole lot of standardized ways of doing that. So to start with, Penny, I wanted to ask, as someone who's been on both sides of the board table, what you're looking for now in performance reporting as a director and whether that matches what you were trying to communicate when you were an executive.
Thanks, Richard. I guess for me, sometimes it feels like what an executive's trying to communicate versus what a non-executive is trying to understand can be at cross purposes. So as an executive, you often feel like, well, I'm getting my chance to go up to the board and I want to make a good impression and I want them to know that I've got it all under control because I've got this great proposal and it's all, I've got it tied up with a big red bow and I've got it all under control. And I want them to think, I want to walk away from that discussion with the directors saying, Penny's got it under control and she's very competent and she's very capable. As a director, I'm interested in knowing that you think you've got it under control, but I'm really interested in what's going to go wrong. And I think there's not enough honesty and openness. And if I could go back to my executive career and, shake myself and say, tell them more about what's going to potentially go wrong and use the experience around the board table in how you're going to solve that. Remember, the board and the management are actually on the same team. We're out to do the best thing we possibly can for shareholders. So it's not just about you just impressing the board. It's actually, as an executive, it's about you getting the best outcome and the best solution. So if there's something that you are worried about a particular program or a project or a M&A acquisition, you need to share that. You're not alone, because the worst thing you can do is not sharing it and then coming back after the fact and people say, well, this all blew up. Why didn't that come up? You're better off sharing it and saying, this can possibly go wrong. This is how I'm thinking about it. But have you got any other ideas? Don't think the board will think less of you because you haven't got all the answers. In fact, what we love is, often to be engaged in solving the problem and sharing experiences. Remember, there's a lot of experience around that board table, a lot of P&L experience, lots of bruises. The best experiences you ever get in your executive career are actually when things go wrong. So you better use the things that have gone wrong for the board as your learning experience rather than learn it again through something going wrong that you've put up. So I think that openness and vulnerability for management, I think, would be something that we need to do. And also making sure that bad news travels faster than good as well. As I said, when something goes wrong, it'll often get caught up down in the levels of the organisation because people want to fix it. They want it to be right. You can have that happening, but you've just got to make sure that, it's suddenly going to appear on the ABC 7 p.m. news or come up on social media that it's been escalated as it's gone through the organisation. So I think there's some of the key things. Just use the board as part of your way to solve some of the riskier, nuttier problems of the proposal that you've got.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Penny, I wanted to ask you about dashboards as a way of doing performance reporting to boards. It's a very common way of giving analytical information in particular. So how do you find those in terms of effectively communicating performance to you as a director?
Look, I think that one of the effective ways of communicating with the direct, you think about information, it's quantitative information and qualitative information. And, this provides the quant information that, the statistics and the data. But what you're actually looking for also is a qualitative interpretation of that as well. So I think you've got to, so it's one off. So it's getting the data, but then also getting management's interpretation of the data. But then in addition to that, there are other things that we really need to, the directors try and do. Directors need to do their own investigations through site visits, for example, asking questions of the people in the boardroom, but also people outside the boardroom. Reading, being able to read the room, I think is really important. It's often you'll get a proposal coming from one executive and you're looking at another executive who's, got their arms folded and the body language is quite telling. So it's actually, you've got to be able to do the softer stuff as well as the harder stuff. So dashboards are really, you couldn't operate without them, but they're not an exclusive be all and end all to be able to solve all of your problems. I think that's really important. So they're very useful, however.
Yeah. I guess one thing that I've noticed with dashboards is there can definitely be kind of metric creep that happens, metric overload. And that can happen, in my observation, on either side of the equation. The management team, it's easy to just add more metrics into a report. As a director, it's relatively easy to just ask for one more metric, and it doesn't feel like it's that big an ask each time it happens. How do you know, as someone who's preparing this kind of reporting to a board, when you've given them enough?
Well, I think one of the things that you can really push back on, I think, because you can actually get too much information. And, sometimes you look at a report and you say, why are we getting this information as a director? It's almost like you need a one in, one out. When I was running the supply chain, you had warehouse slots and you had a 5,000 warehouse slots, pick slots in a warehouse. If you're going to range that new line, it had to take that pick slot and something had to come out. And it's almost like you need to apply a one in, one out type of approach to this, or at least on a regular basis, refresh this and say, are we really using it? One of the things we do on our boards is at the end of the meeting, I have a review of the papers and say, what is it we needed? What is it we didn't need? What is it we could do without? Because often these things get a life of their own and you end up with 800 pages of board papers, of which, 200 are probably a bit redundant because they've been asked for by one director at one point in time. I think there's also a role for the chair to play to say, when a director asks for information, rather than say, well, let's get it on a regular reporting, to actually say, well, do we really need that? Or maybe it's a one-off thing that you report once and don't report again. I think it's an important role for the chair to play to be saying, what information are we getting that we don't need to get? And if you're asking for something extra, what value is it actually going to add? And is there something we can take away? Because management's not there just to create reports for the board. It needs to be adding value and adding value to the decision making. I think, therefore, a good time to review what goes into these papers and what reports are asked for is, as you go through the strategy cycle, as you go through and you say, okay, well, the plans for the year, we're going to double down on this, we're going to double down on that. Are we getting the right stats to do that? And if so, if not, what extra things do we need? And as we have lightened off on a couple of other things, let's now say, well, we don't need as many stats or pieces of data on those pieces that we've now ticked off and said we're doing. It's just that that constant review, be it at the board level, be it by the chair, but also as part of the strategy cycle as to the information that you need to really drive the business moving forward.
Yeah. I think you touched on this in the context of directors asking for things that other directors may not necessarily be that interested in. I guess sometimes when directors are asking for something, it's a reflection of their expertise or appetite for detail in a particular area. Given that different directors will have different views on that, what's the best approach for an executive to make sure that what they're reporting does satisfy the whole board, and particularly some of those directors who do want to dive in a little bit deeper on a particular area?
Yeah, I think one of the things that directors need to be cognizant of is that you need to probably be leveraging the stuff that management already has, as opposed to ask for new information. Remember, for me as a retail director, I might want to look at wage percentages and a whole lot of other things. But if it's not a key metric that management in this particular firm, in this particular industry operates or needs to operate on, you've got to be told, well, actually, that's not a stat that we actually use. I mean, in the recent government submission, I know Brad Banducci was being asked about return on equity, which it isn't a stat that actually is used to run the business in the retail organisation. So there's a good dialogue that needs to happen between both the management team and the chair on these directors that actually ask for stuff that's outside the remit, because if it's not the way that the company is to be managed or needs to be managed, then you shouldn't be asking for the information, shouldn't be bogging management down. And I think there's a role to play from the management to push back in that instance, to say, well, why do you want it? And if they do ask for something, well, that's actually something we do provide. We can give it to you, and we can give it to all directors. It's something we look at. Might be a bit granular. We might look at it for once or something, but don't embed it in the ongoing reporting, and don't add stuff that's not actually part of the key dashboards of the management team, I would have thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And then finally, Penny, I wanted to ask you, if you were a leader in a business who's been asked to prepare their first ever performance report to a board, what would be your top tips to that person to get that right?
Okay, so firstly, tell it like it is. Don't say everything's under control. You need to share the challenges and the opportunities, and importantly, utilise the board expertise if you want to get a problem solved. As I said earlier, boards and management are aligned in wanting to do the best thing for the organisation. They're not there to mark our own work. The next thing is, when presenting, there's one of the most frustrating things is that you put this wonderful executives put wonderful papers out there. The board spends a lot of time reading it. So we've already all spent a lot of time coming up to speed. The best use of the time that you've got in front of the board is actually not presenting the paper. It's in the interaction, the probing and the questioning. So you're better off to say, I'm actually taking it the paper as read, and really do that, because often people say, I'll take the paper as read and then walk through every slide. You take the paper as read, you might say that, and the three key things you need to think about today are this, this and this, and then go to question. If you've got a 20-minute slot and there's no questions after 10 minutes, don't think that's a fail. That's actually, you've done a really good job with your board paper. You've done a really good job with answering the questions, and the board is happy to generally to approve that. So don't think that's a fail. You've made a really good impression. In fact, often agendas are tight, and there's one thing the board get very restless about is if presentations go on too long because people are labouring points that they already get. So I think it's really important to be comfortable with a short stint in the boardroom. As I said, focus on the risks about what can go wrong. Focus on call out the things that can go wrong, how you're thinking about tackling it, and but leave space for questions. The last thing is read the room. I mean, when you're in with your exec colleagues, you'll often see people you've lost along the way. Then you can also do that in the board if you're not able to read the room. So read the room. If people are fidgeting, that they want to move on, just move to questions. If someone looks like they're a bit distracted, you can actually say, well, Richard, I've had this problem you've had this experience prior. What do you think about this? Use the board and use them as a way of solving your problems, and certainly put it back on them. They shouldn't be just passengers sitting there just waiting for the cup of tea and the sandwich at the end of the day. They actually should be there actively engaging with you on that. But my biggest thing is, don't try and say everything's under control. Don't try and take up all the oxygen in the room, and just be open and responsive to questions, and use the board as a great resource to get your problem solved.